There is a quiet kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself. It doesn't speak to be seen. It doesn't fight to be right. It simply is. And when you begin to focus on yourself and stay silent, genuinely, not out of anger, but out of clarity, something remarkable happens. Everything around you begins to shift, because the world outside starts to mirror the stillness you cultivate within. Many of us spend our lives trying to fix the noise around us. We try to change people, correct situations, explain ourselves endlessly, thinking that peace will finally come when everything out there is aligned. But the truth is this: nothing falls into place out there until it first falls into place in here. When you walk into a quiet temple early in the morning, before the chants have begun, and before the incense has been lit, there is a kind of presence in the air that can only be felt in stillness. That presence is not passive. It is not weak. It is deeply alive. It is awareness itself. In many ways, this is what happens when a human being finally learns the art of silence, not as a strategy to withdraw, but as a way to meet themselves fully. In relationships, in times of emotional unrest, and even in the middle of conflict, it is this kind of silence that holds the greatest power. Many confuse silence with weakness. They believe that if they don't speak, they will not be heard. If they do not assert themselves immediately, they will be overlooked. But this is not true silence. This is fear in disguise. True silence is not a retreat from confrontation. It is a refinement of presence. It does not come from powerlessness. It comes from a higher level of mastery. Think of a glass of muddy water. If you keep stirring it, the water never clears. But if you let it sit, still and undisturbed, the particles settle. The same is true with the human mind. When emotions are high, when relationships feel chaotic, our instinct is often to do something, say something, prove something. But most problems in human connection are not solved through excess movement. They are solved through stillness that reveals what is real. I once spoke to an older woman who had been married for 35 years. She told me something profound. She said, "I used to argue to be heard. Now, I sit with myself until I understand what I need. Most of the time, I realize it's not even about him. It's about something in me that needs healing." That is the power of silence used correctly. In neuroscience, there's something called the default mode network, an interconnected system in the brain that activates when we're not focused on the external world. It's where self-reflection, memory integration, and introspection live. But here's the paradox: most people avoid silence because it activates this part of the brain, and when it does, all the thoughts, regrets, fears, and unresolved emotions begin to rise. They mistake this discomfort as a sign that silence is bad. In reality, silence is just pulling back the curtain so we can finally see. When you practice intentional silence in your relationship with yourself, something begins to shift in the way you relate to others. You stop needing to speak just to fill the air. You stop feeling the urgency to explain yourself when someone misunderstands you. And perhaps most importantly, you learn to delay reaction. And in that space between stimulus and response lies something precious: choice. Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, said, "Between stimulus and response there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Silence gives us that space. In relationships, that space can mean everything. Think of the last time you were hurt by someone's words. What was your first impulse? For most people, it is to defend, to lash out, or to retreat into emotional shutdown. But when you have cultivated inner silence, you allow that emotional wave to pass through your body like a storm without drowning in it. You give your nervous system permission to regulate before your mouth opens. And very often, what you would have said in that first wave of emotion is something you would later regret. There is a form of emotional violence that comes not from intention, but from the inability to pause. Let us take an example from real life. A man and a woman have been in a long-term relationship. Over the years, arguments have become more frequent. She feels he doesn't listen. He feels she always criticizes. One night, he comes home late and she begins to speak with frustration in her tone. He, already tired and defensive, snaps back. The argument escalates quickly. They both say things they don't mean, words that cannot be taken back. Now imagine the same scenario, but the man, upon hearing her frustrated voice, pauses, not from fear, but from awareness. He feels the tension rising in his body, observes the tightening of his chest, the shortening of his breath. He chooses not to react, but to breathe and stay silent. Not the silent treatment, but a conscious silence that gives space. That moment allows both people to feel the energy and recognize the emotion underneath the words. That kind of silence interrupts patterns. It invites presence. In the Shaolin tradition, silence is not emptiness. It is the foundation of all wisdom. The mind that cannot be silent cannot hear truth. It can only react. It can only defend. And in relationships, two people defending can never build closeness. Only when one person becomes the space can healing begin. But this requires emotional maturity. The kind that comes from years of self-work, not just meditation but reflection, not just mindfulness but self-honesty. And that leads us into the second teaching, focusing on yourself as the foundation for emotional sovereignty. To focus on yourself is often misinterpreted. Many think it means selfishness or detachment. But true self-focus is not about isolating yourself from others. It's about returning to the center from which all healthy relationships are born. We live in a world where people are overly focused on how others behave, speak, respond, or validate them. They measure their self-worth through attention received or approval given. This dependency is what causes most emotional suffering. It's not the lack of love, it's the lack of self-anchoring. Let me offer a practical story. A woman in her mid-40s came to a retreat, burdened by heartbreak. Her partner had left her unexpectedly, and she was caught in a loop of self-blame. She kept saying, "What did I do wrong?" She had been scrolling through his social media, checking who he was with, comparing herself to other women. In one session, I asked her a simple question, "Where is your energy going right now?" She paused. "To him," she whispered. "Exactly," I said. "You've given all your focus to a person who is no longer present. Your nervous system is still tied to his choices. How can you begin to heal when you've abandoned yourself for someone who has already left?" That day, she made a commitment to redirect her energy inward. She started walking daily, eating consciously, writing letters to herself, practicing silence each morning. Slowly, her nervous system began to settle. Her eyes cleared. She stopped checking his pages. Not because she stopped caring, but because she remembered who she is. That is emotional sovereignty. When you reclaim your focus, you reclaim your energy. And when you reclaim your energy, you rebuild your life from within. Psychologically, this is rooted in the concept of internal locus of control. The belief that you are the author of your experience, not the victim of someone else's decisions. When you operate from this place, your well-being is not conditional. Your peace is not dependent. And your love, when given, is not out of lack. It is out of fullness. In relationships, this changes everything. When two people enter a connection from wholeness, they do not look to the other to complete them. They do not demand that the other be their source of happiness. Instead, they become companions in mutual evolution. They support, they encourage, but they do not carry each other's emotional weight. And when one partner begins to focus on themselves, not with withdrawal, but with quiet self-investment, they radiate a kind of groundedness that is deeply attractive. You can feel it. They speak less, but what they say carries weight. They don't rush to prove themselves. They don't chase, they choose. There's a saying in Eastern philosophy, the sage does not strive, and therefore, he is never out of balance. To focus on yourself means to cultivate this inner balance. It means paying attention to your breath, your body, your thoughts, your triggers. It means asking, what part of me is reacting right now? And it means taking time each day to sit in silence, not to escape, but to return. Your relationships will begin to shift the moment you shift your relationship with yourself. You will notice that arguments become less reactive. You won't need to win anymore because you're not operating from insecurity. You'll find yourself listening more. Not because you have nothing to say, but because you are no longer threatened by someone else's emotion. This is what happens when the internal world becomes stronger than the external noise. In physiology, we know that the vagus nerve, responsible for regulating the parasympathetic nervous system, responds to breath, presence, and stillness. When the vagus nerve is toned, the body enters a state of calm awareness. This is not just a spiritual concept. It is biological truth. The more time you spend focusing on your inner world, the more capable you become of self-regulation. And this ability to self-regulate is the foundation of every healthy connection. Let's consider a simple metaphor. A tree with deep roots does not panic in the wind. The storm may come, the branches may sway, but the roots hold firm. That is you. When your focus remains centered, you are not immune to emotion. You are not above heartbreak, but you are no longer destabilized by it. To focus on yourself and to remain silent in the face of chaos is not avoidance. It is preparation. You are preparing your energy. You are conserving your power. You are practicing presence in a world that worships distraction. In time, you will see those who master their inner state begin to magnetize peace around them. The need to control others falls away. The need to explain everything disappears. Because the deeper truth is this: you do not need to force anything to fall into place. You only need to return to the place within where nothing is missing. There is a lesson nature teaches us again and again, and yet most people pass by it without learning. If you watch a river long enough, you will notice that it does not resist the rocks in its path. It flows around them. Over time, with patience and persistence, it even shapes them. The river does not force its way. It follows its nature. In human relationships, many of us are like turbulent waves, constantly clashing, pushing, and pulling, trying to shape the other through force. But force breeds resistance. Only stillness and self-discipline allow us to influence anything lasting. Emotional discipline is often misunderstood. Many think it means suppression. They assume it's about denying emotion, hiding feeling, or pretending to be unaffected. But that is not mastery. That is repression. And what is repressed does not disappear. It only grows roots in the unconscious and influences our actions in secret. True emotional discipline is conscious. It means to feel deeply, but respond wisely. It means to know the difference between what is being triggered and what is actually happening. It is the ability to sit with discomfort and not demand that others take it away. And this becomes especially important in close relationships, those with our partners, our family, and even our children. Let us consider a simple example. A man comes home after a long day, emotionally exhausted, but says nothing. His partner senses his withdrawal and asks what is wrong. He dismisses her. She feels ignored and becomes reactive. Words are exchanged, doors slammed. Hours pass. Both are hurt, not because of what happened in the moment, but because neither could hold space for their own emotional state. Now imagine the same situation, but instead, the man enters the home, feels his internal agitation rising and pauses. He notices his breath is shallow. His thoughts are negative. Instead of immediately engaging, he excuses himself and takes 10 minutes to be alone. He breathes. He reconnects. He identifies what he's feeling: disappointment, not with his partner, but with himself. When he returns, he says, "I'm feeling overwhelmed. I need a moment to recalibrate." That simple act of awareness saves the relationship from an unnecessary storm. This is emotional discipline. The discipline to observe your state without becoming your state. Neuroscience supports this. In moments of high emotion, the amygdala, the brain's emotional center, activates a fight or flight response. But with training, especially mindfulness and focused breathing, we can activate the prefrontal cortex, the center of rational thought and decision-making. This physiological reality shows us that emotional discipline is not abstract. It is trainable. And once trained, it becomes the gatekeeper of your words, your actions, and ultimately, your destiny. One woman once shared with me her method for practicing emotional discipline with her teenage daughter. She said, "Before I speak when I'm angry, I ask myself, what do I want her to remember about me in this moment?" That question gave her space to pause. Over the years, her daughter learned the same practice. Their relationship became one of mutual respect. Not because they never disagreed, but because they learned not to attack during the disagreement. In Eastern philosophy, we say that the one who angers you, conquers you. This is not about being submissive or passive. It is about maintaining your own center, so that no one else can pull you from it. In romantic relationships, this is perhaps the most vital skill one can develop, because love without emotional discipline turns into codependency, blame, and emotional volatility. Many people enter love as a means to soothe their inner pain, but when that love triggers old wounds, as it inevitably will, they lash out, not because the partner is wrong, but because their pain has never been integrated. And so we return to the idea of focusing on oneself, but now with a layer deeper, learning to discipline the self emotionally, so that love is not contaminated by the past. One couple in their 60s came to a relationship workshop, both having been divorced before. They said, "We don't want to repeat the same cycles." During the workshop, I watched them navigate a disagreement. He spoke calmly, she began to raise her voice. He stayed present, didn't interrupt. Afterward, she said through tears, "Every man I've loved shouted back, but you didn't, and I realized I've been fighting the ghost of someone else." His silence wasn't passive. It was intentional. It allowed her to see herself. That is emotional discipline in service to love. We do not develop this discipline through reading alone. We develop it through practice, through rituals, through conscious habits that train the nervous system to stay calm under pressure. One of the simplest ways to cultivate this is to create a daily space of silence. 10 minutes each morning, before the world enters your mind. Sit quietly, watch the breath, notice the thoughts. Let them pass. This is not meditation for transcendence. It is training for presence. Over time, this presence follows you into conflict, into the workplace, into your most difficult conversations. Emotional discipline is not about becoming emotionless. It is about choosing the highest expression of your emotions, wisdom, patience, clarity, especially when chaos arises. And it leads naturally into the next teaching: how strategic silence builds relational power and trust. There is an old story in Zen tradition of a master who never answered questions immediately. When asked something important, he would pause, sometimes for minutes, before responding. A student once asked, "Why do you wait before answering?" The master replied, "Because I must first remove my ego from the words." This is what strategic silence looks like. It is the ability to delay speech so that what emerges is pure, useful, and true. In relationships, silence can be destructive or healing. The silent treatment, used to punish or manipulate, is emotional abandonment. It breaks trust. But intentional silence, the kind used to create space, to reflect, to prevent harm, is a form of leadership. It signals emotional maturity. It shows the other person that you value clarity over reaction and truth over victory. Let us look at a story from real life. A young couple had been together for 2 years. The woman was emotionally expressive, the man more reserved. During conflict, she demanded immediate resolution. He often shut down. At first, they believed this was incompatibility, but through guidance, they discovered something deeper. He needed time to reflect before speaking. She needed to feel emotionally held. Once they named this pattern, they agreed on a strategy. When conflict arose, he would take 15 minutes of silence, not to escape, but to process. Then they would return, both calmer, and speak. This practice changed everything. Arguments reduced, understanding deepened, and most importantly, trust was built. Strategic silence only works when both people understand its purpose. It must be framed, communicated, and practiced. But when used correctly, it becomes a powerful tool for relational growth. Psychologically, this aligns with the concept of emotional containment, the ability to hold one's feelings without spilling them onto others. In this space, silence becomes a crucible for transformation. Thoughts settle, emotions clarify. What remains is essential. In traditional martial arts, a master does not move first. He waits, observes, responds with precision. The same principle applies in relationship communication. Not every comment requires a reply. Not every accusation requires a defense. Sometimes silence disarms more than argument. It allows the other to hear themselves. And very often in that space, they recognize the error in their own thinking. Strategic silence also builds self-respect. When you no longer need to explain yourself constantly or defend your every action, you step into a place of inner authority. You know your intentions. You understand your values. You are not afraid of misunderstanding because you are aligned with truth. A woman once said to me, "I stopped arguing with people who were committed to misunderstanding me. I started using my silence to protect my peace." This is not detachment, it is discernment. In intimate partnerships especially, the ability to hold silence during emotional peaks allows both people to return to a state of connection more quickly. Think of the last argument you had. What would have shifted if, instead of escalating, one of you simply paused and breathed? Strategic silence is not absence. It is presence, deepened. There's also a deeper energetic reality. In Eastern philosophy, we say that your energy speaks louder than your words. Silence allows others to feel your frequency. If your silence is grounded, compassionate, and clear, people will feel safe around you. But if your silence is tense, resentful, or cold, it creates walls. So ask yourself, what is the quality of my silence? Is it soft or sharp? Is it expansive or constricted? Is it a pause or a punishment? When used wisely, silence becomes your most powerful communication. It says, I am present, I am aware. I choose to speak only what is necessary and true. This kind of presence invites others to rise. It teaches them to meet you at the same level. And when they don't, your silence becomes a boundary, not a battle. In this way, strategic silence teaches people how to treat you. Not through force, but through frequency. A teacher once said, you are always training others how to treat you, whether you know it or not. When your silence is purposeful, people learn to respect your space. They learn to approach you with intention. They learn that your words are not cheap, but sacred. This is how relational power is cultivated. Not through control, but through presence. Not through constant explanation, but through consistent alignment. In practical terms, this means slowing down. It means not replying to every message instantly, not reacting to every slight, not needing to be right in every discussion. It means choosing silence not as absence, but as clarity. One of the most powerful things you can say in a relationship is, I need a moment of silence to reflect before I respond. This invites emotional maturity. It slows the nervous system. It models self-respect. And in that space, what emerges is often more healing than anything you could have said in reaction. Silence used wisely becomes the soil from which understanding, trust, and connection grow. It allows the noise to fall away, so only what matters remains. There is an invisible language between people that goes unspoken, yet deeply felt. It is not communicated through words, but through presence, through gestures, through the way your energy enters a room. Long before your mouth opens, your nervous system is already speaking. The quality of your presence, the way you hold yourself in stillness, the level of peace or turbulence in your inner world, affects how others experience you, how they interpret your intentions, and how they respond. This is the energetic reality of self-focus. When you truly focus on yourself, not as an escape from others, but as a commitment to inner alignment, your personal energy begins to shift. And when your energy shifts, the dynamics of your relationships shift too. Imagine walking into a room filled with people. There is one individual standing in the corner, not loud, not drawing attention, but there is something about them that everyone notices. They are calm, their posture is relaxed. Their eyes are not searching. They are not trying to prove anything. They are not waiting to be seen. And yet, everyone notices them. This is the quiet magnetism of someone who is deeply connected to themselves. Someone who has cultivated their internal world with care, discipline, and self-awareness. This energetic quality cannot be faked. It is not the result of status, appearance, or external performance. It is the result of inner work, the quiet, consistent practice of focusing on your thoughts, your emotions, your patterns, and your purpose. It is the outcome of choosing stillness over noise, reflection over reaction, and intention over impulse. From a physiological standpoint, neuroscience teaches us that the human nervous system is highly attuned to safety cues. When someone is internally calm and regulated, their presence activates a sense of safety in those around them. This is known as co-regulation. Your nervous system sends signals to others, informing them, unconsciously, whether you are safe, whether you are a threat, or whether you are chaotic, and others respond accordingly. In relationships, this becomes profoundly important. Consider a couple arguing over something as simple as miscommunication. One partner, triggered, begins to raise their voice. The other, instead of matching that energy, stays grounded. They breathe, they observe. They do not withdraw, but they also do not escalate. Within minutes, the heightened energy of the room begins to shift. Why? Because one nervous system chose regulation and invited the other to meet it there. Now let's reflect on what often happens when we focus only on controlling others. When we attempt to force outcomes, demand understanding, or manipulate emotions, we create tension. Control is rooted in fear, but focusing on yourself, your breath, your clarity, your alignment, is an act of trust. Trust that peace within leads to peace without. Trust that by regulating yourself, you are influencing the space around you more powerfully than through words alone. I once guided a man in his early 40s who was going through a turbulent relationship. His partner accused him of being emotionally unavailable. He, in turn, accused her of being too reactive. They were caught in a loop of criticism and defense. In our sessions, I asked him not to focus on changing her, but instead to devote 3 weeks solely to his own internal state. Each morning, he would journal his emotional patterns. He would meditate for 15 minutes. He would pause before responding in conversations. He would practice speaking only what was necessary and true. At first, he resisted. He believed that unless she changed, nothing would improve. But slowly something began to shift. As he became more aware of his own emotional landscape, his reactions softened. He noticed how often he dismissed her feelings. He began to listen, not just with his ears, but with his full attention. And most importantly, his presence changed. His tone carried less urgency. His eyes became softer, his posture more relaxed. One day she told him, "I don't know what you're doing, but I feel safer with you." This is the power of energetic influence through self-focus. When you focus on yourself, you also begin to notice how much energy you waste trying to manage perceptions. Many people exhaust themselves trying to be liked, understood, validated. But the truth is, when your energy is scattered, when it is reaching outward for acceptance, you lose touch with your center. You become fragmented, and fragmented energy cannot attract wholeness. Relationships thrive when both individuals are whole within themselves. Not perfect, but whole. Wholeness means you are not looking for someone to complete you, but to complement you. You are not entering love as a beggar, but as a giver. And giving does not mean sacrificing your well-being. It means offering the overflow of your own alignment. There is a beautiful quote by Rumi: "Don't get lost in your pain. Know that one day your pain will become your cure." When you focus on yourself, you begin to see your emotional wounds not as weaknesses, but as doorways to deeper awareness. And this awareness transforms your energy. Instead of projecting pain, you begin to embody healing. And people feel this, even if they cannot articulate it. Let me share a story of a woman in her 50s who had been single for many years. She came to a retreat, hoping to learn why relationships always seemed to fail her. During our time together, she realized that she had been seeking connection while disconnected from herself. She had neglected her inner world, her boundaries, her needs, her vision, because she believed that love meant giving everything. In truth, it meant giving from alignment, not abandonment. After the retreat, she began a quiet process of self-realignment. She took herself on weekly walks in nature. She practiced silence each evening. She began to express her truth, not with force but with grace. Over time, she noticed that the people she attracted were different, more respectful, more grounded, more capable of emotional depth. This shift did not come from chasing anyone. It came from returning to herself. Your energy is your introduction. Long before you speak, you are felt. And when your energy is rooted in self-focus, it radiates something unmistakable: calm strength. This strength does not dominate, it invites. It does not prove, it emanates. And it changes the relational field around you. Let us also understand the subtlety of masculine and feminine energy in this context. Regardless of gender, we all carry both. The masculine energy within us holds direction, discipline, presence. The feminine holds intuition, emotion, receptivity. When we focus on ourselves, we balance these internal energies. We become capable of leading with integrity and loving with vulnerability. We stop needing the other to carry what we have not cultivated. In one relationship I witnessed, the woman was highly intuitive, but emotionally volatile. The man was disciplined, but emotionally detached. They kept blaming each other for imbalance. But through conscious self-focus, she began to regulate her emotions, while he began to access his emotional depth. The result was a more balanced relational field. Each brought more of themselves into the space, rather than extracting from the other. This is not just spiritual theory, it is practical alignment. When your internal energies are balanced, your external relationships reflect that harmony. But when you are in conflict with yourself, you will unconsciously seek partners who mirror that conflict. So the question becomes, What are you radiating? If you are full of unspoken resentment, people will feel guarded around you. If you are grounded and open-hearted, people will feel safe. Your inner world is not hidden, it is constantly communicating. Even in parenting, this principle applies. Children are extremely sensitive to energy. A child may not understand the words you speak, but they understand the vibration you carry. If you are present, they thrive. If you are anxious, they mirror that anxiety. This is why focusing on yourself is not selfish, it is generational healing. A mother once told me, "I stopped yelling at my kids not because they changed, but because I changed the way I responded to stress." Her shift in energy changed the atmosphere of the home. Peace became normal, not because of control, but because of consistency in her presence. When you focus on yourself, you become more available to others, not less. You have more capacity, more clarity, more grounded love. Your boundaries become clear, not rigid. You say yes from wholeness and no without guilt. You stop explaining yourself excessively because your life becomes your explanation. Energetic influence is subtle but powerful. It requires no permission. It does not beg for approval. It is the quiet revolution of being so connected to yourself that you no longer need to chase anything. You attract what resonates with your frequency, and you let go of what disturbs your peace. You begin to understand that relationships are not about possession, but about resonance. And the only way to resonate with truth is to live in alignment with it. So you wake up each day not to be impressive, but to be authentic. You tend to your mind as you would a garden. You clear the weeds of comparison, judgment, and fear. You plant the seeds of self-respect, stillness, and clarity. You water them with discipline. And you trust that in time, your energy will speak for you. People will begin to say, "There's something different about you. I can't quite name it, but I feel it." And that feeling, that unspoken quality, is the reward of focusing on yourself. It is not loud. It does not demand applause. But it transforms every room you enter, every conversation you hold, every love you share. There is a profound strength in remaining silent when everything within you wants to react. Silence, when rooted in awareness and discipline, becomes a form of spiritual maturity, a gateway to power that cannot be taken, only cultivated. In relationships especially, the discipline of silence is not a withdrawal. It is a conscious redirection of energy. When a person learns not to be governed by every emotional wave, they step into a position of inner leadership. And from this place, the way they love, the way they respond, and the way they live begins to shift in ways that bring peace, clarity, and purpose to those around them. It is often misunderstood, this kind of silence. People assume that to be silent is to suppress. But true silence is not suppression, it is observation. It is the act of creating space between stimulus and response. It is noticing your instinct to react and choosing instead to remain present. In neuroscience, this is known as the power of the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for conscious decision-making. When activated, it allows you to pause, reflect, and respond in a way that aligns with your higher self, not just your immediate emotion. Nowhere is this more vital than in relationships. How often do we say things in moments of pain that we later regret? Words spoken in anger cannot be unsaid. They lodge themselves in the heart of another, like small thorns. They may heal, but the mark remains. And yet, a single moment of stillness, a breath taken before speaking, can prevent the wound altogether. There was once a woman who had grown tired of repeating the same patterns in her relationships. Every time a conflict arose, she reacted. She defended, criticized, accused. And in doing so, she kept reliving the same emotional pain. One day, after a particularly hurtful argument, she sat in meditation and asked herself, "What am I trying to prove when I speak from this place?" The answer came not in words, but in a deep feeling of exhaustion. She realized that her words were always trying to defend a wound that had never been allowed to breathe. From that moment, she began to practice intentional silence, not the kind that shuts people out, but the kind that listens deeply before responding. She learned to sit with discomfort, to allow space between feeling and expression, and slowly she noticed a change. The people around her began to open up more. Her partner stopped reacting defensively. Why? Because her silence was not rejection. It was presence. It created safety. When you stop reacting to everything, you start witnessing everything. And in that witnessing, a new kind of intelligence arises, not intellectual but intuitive. You begin to hear what is not said. You begin to feel what another cannot express. This kind of awareness is the essence of relational wisdom. It is not about having the right answer. It is about creating the right atmosphere for truth to surface naturally. There is a saying in Eastern philosophy, when the heart is quiet, the soul speaks. When your inner world is still, your actions become wise. You are no longer driven by fear, insecurity, or the need to control. Instead, your energy becomes grounded, unshakable. This is deeply attractive, not in the superficial sense, but in the spiritual sense. People gravitate toward those who make them feel calm, not those who constantly provoke their nervous system. Consider the difference between emotional noise and emotional clarity. Emotional noise is constant expression without reflection. It is driven by impulse and fear. Emotional clarity, on the other hand, arises from disciplined silence. It is the result of giving yourself time to understand what you are truly feeling before you attempt to share it with another. In many relationships, silence is feared. It is seen as distance, as detachment. But when silence is sacred, it becomes intimacy. Two people sitting in silence without the need to fill space. This is true connection. Words, when they do come, are slower, more intentional, more truthful. There is no rush, no pressure, only presence. A man once told me about a conversation he had with his daughter after years of misunderstanding. He said, "For the first time, I just listened. I didn't prepare a defense. I didn't try to fix her. I just stayed quiet and let her speak." At the end of that conversation, she looked at him and said, "That's the first time I felt like you actually saw me." His silence had become a mirror. In not rushing to speak, he allowed her reflection to emerge. This principle applies to romantic partnerships as well. Imagine two people who each know how to sit with themselves before projecting onto the other. Imagine how different conflict would be if both individuals first asked, "What is mine to own here?" before pointing fingers. This is the practice of relational mastery, not perfect communication, but humble presence. In ancient monastic traditions, silence was not a punishment. It was a portal. Monks would spend weeks in silence not to escape life, but to understand it more deeply. In that silence, they would come face to face with their internal chaos, the thoughts, the judgments, the unmet needs. And only by sitting with them, without reacting, could they begin to transform. This practice is just as applicable in modern relationships. Every interaction with another human being is an opportunity to observe yourself. When your partner says something you don't like, what arises in you? Is it a need to be right, a fear of rejection, a past memory resurfacing? When you sit with that instead of immediately reacting, you become a student of your own mind. And this kind of learning leads to liberation. Silence also allows for emotional digestion. Just as the body cannot process food if it is constantly eating, the heart cannot process experience if it is constantly expressing. There must be moments of stillness, moments where we let the experience settle, find its place, and reveal its meaning. This is especially important after arguments or emotionally charged conversations. Instead of trying to resolve everything immediately, take space. Let silence do its work. The answer often arises not through effort, but through surrender. One of the most powerful habits you can develop in any relationship is the pause. Before responding to a difficult statement, pause. Before sending the text, pause. Before making assumptions, pause. This brief space, though small in time, is immense in power. In that space, you shift from unconscious reaction to conscious choice. This is not easy. It requires practice. It requires humility. It requires being okay with discomfort. But the reward is profound. Your relationships become less chaotic. Your communication becomes clearer. Your presence becomes more respected. A woman I once worked with was navigating a breakup. Her instinct was to send long messages explaining, justifying, and pleading. But through our work together, she learned to hold the silence. To not chase clarity outside, but to find it within. Weeks later, her ex reached out, not because she had pressured him, but because her silence had become a magnet. It showed self-respect. It communicated strength without aggression, and it allowed him to reflect, which no barrage of words could have done. This does not mean silence is always the answer. But when used with intention, it becomes a language more honest than speech. It says, I trust myself enough not to rush. It says, I respect you enough to give space. It says, I am not afraid of my emotions. I can sit with them. In psychological studies, couples who practice reflective listening, where one person speaks while the other simply listens without interruption, report higher satisfaction and emotional safety. Why? Because we all want to be seen and heard. But being seen requires stillness, and being heard requires silence. They go hand in hand. The wisdom in staying silent is not about hiding. It is about choosing. It is about responding with wisdom rather than reacting from wounding. It is about knowing that not everything needs to be said, and not every feeling needs to be shared in the moment. Some truths are better revealed through time, through observation, through action. There is also a sacredness in inner privacy, in not needing to share every struggle with the world, in knowing that some things are meant to be held close, processed internally, and released quietly. In today's culture of constant expression, this kind of silence is rare, but it is deeply powerful. It builds integrity. It builds self-trust. When you walk through life with this quiet strength, people notice, not because you speak loudly, but because your energy speaks truth. Not because you demand respect, but because your silence commands it. And in your relationships, this presence creates a space where love can grow, not out of pressure, but out of peace. To remain silent when your ego wants to shout is an act of mastery. To sit with your pain until it ripens into understanding is an act of grace. And to speak only when your words are infused with clarity and compassion is an act of love. So when the urge arises to react, remember you have another choice. The choice to observe. The choice to breathe. The choice to wait until what you say will add truth, not tension. This is how you begin to lead with your energy, not just your voice. This is how relationships transform, not through force, but through the quiet wisdom of presence. When you focus on yourself and stay silent, everything begins to align, not because the world changes, but because you do. You no longer chase approval, because your self-worth is no longer on trial. You no longer fear being misunderstood, because your peace is not dependent on anyone's perception. You become deeply rooted, not in ego, but in essence. And from this grounded place, life no longer feels like a series of battles, but a series of invitations to grow, to love more purely, and to live more fully. This is the quiet revolution of self-mastery, the discipline to withdraw your energy from things that drain you, the clarity to know that not everything requires your reaction, the strength to sit in stillness while the world spins, and the wisdom to understand that healing does not always make noise. The relationships you once struggled to maintain begin to find their natural balance. Why? Because your energy now speaks before your words do. Your presence now says more than your explanations ever could. You've become a sanctuary, not because you are untouched by conflict, but because you are unmoved by chaos. In a world addicted to noise, your silence becomes a gift. In a time obsessed with validation, your self-focus becomes freedom. And in relationships clouded by fear, your presence becomes a lighthouse, steady, silent, and seen from afar. So do not fear the stillness. Do not mistake silence for weakness. It is in the quiet spaces that your soul returns to itself, and it is from that space that you begin to live, not as a reaction to the world, but as a reflection of your truth. This is your power. Not to dominate, but to align. Not to shout, but to radiate. Not to chase, but to attract. Let the world move as it will. You have found your center. Stay there. From that stillness, everything else will fall into place.